Oh, hello. So now, thank you so much, Marcin and all the panelists for those wonderful presentations, very insightful. So now we have come to the closing session after 5 series of presentations over the last 2 weeks. My name is Erie Tamale, Senior Program Officer and Head of Capacity Building and Knowledge Management at the CBD Secretariat in Montreal. I'll be co-chairing this session with Ismemen Osemwege, Assistant Coordinator of the West African Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, an initiative that is coordinated by the Center for Development and Research at the University of Bonn. We will start this presentation, closing session with a presentation of the preliminary conclusions and recommendations of the virtual sessions by Dr. Lily.O.Rodriguez of IUBS. Dr. Rodriguez is a Peruvian ecologist with extensive experience in nature conservation, sustainable development, and research in topics related to the Convention on Biological Diversity. She's also a member of the IUBS and has been one of the key organizers of all the past science forums that we've had over the last several years. So I'll now give the floor to Dr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Erie. Good morning to everyone. This is a summary of all the presentations and recommendations. It's a little bit long yet. We didn't have the time to, really compile every session together. So we start with this first session on advanced solutions for transition, where the main topic was on scenarios and models, including NFF can play a powerful role on designing solutions for transformative change through a holistic and transdisciplinary approach and coupling multiple models to describe various indirect drivers at the local scale. We need to develop integrated scenarios and models. This could capture different value systems, including indigenous and local knowledge through participatory approaches. There is a mismatch of spatial scales, values, institutions, and supply demand of ecosystem services that need to be addressed when designing these solutions. Harmonizing and maximizing various efforts and solutions for altogether biodiversity, climate change, and sustainable production and consumption in this circular economy will be key. Natural and green infrastructure as a nature-based solution can be used as an alternative to technical infrastructure and shows the importance of bottom-up collaboration involving the local communities, network governance with non-governmental institutions, and multiple stakeholders as building blocks of social and human infrastructure. On the session on enabling conditions for transitioning to zero net habitat loss or zero net deforestation, land degradation, and land use changes, there was a conversation on the integrated land use planning, as well as inclusive and responsible land governance, is a key enabler of this concept on the other convention on land degradation and land degradation neutrality concept. For avoiding, reducing, and reversing this land degradation, it is important to have an enabling environment which fosters multiple environmental, social, and economic benefits. The zero growth and the zero net deforestation are often conceived as alternatives, but each may be useful at different scales or in different contexts. However, reconciling these two concepts requires at least aligning, if not integrating, public and private governance of supply chains It is critical to address the systemic drivers of biodiversity loss with ambitious targets. So the ambition should be that actors go beyond limiting biodiversity goals to supporting restoration and moving towards a net gain through regenerative practices, as has been proposed in the targets. Taking into account economic actors, sectors, and incentives that are most responsible for biodiversity loss. For instance, in the context of food systems, by redirecting official and unofficial incentives, of adding transparency in land transactions between governments and agribusiness. Clarify and specification of the outcome goals and targets in the global biodiversity framework are still needed. Net outcomes principles, including, for instance, the recognition that there will be some losses of biodiversity, but prioritizing avoidance of loss and setting clear limits to counterbalance losses with gains. However, we recognize that biodiversity is not interchangeable, so inappropriate substitution should be banned. An economic balance of the cost, public funds and revenues on this 30% of land conservation, it might be the instrument to provide a new perspective of that target, also contributing to the zero net habitat loss. We have seen that economic analyses are becoming more and more frequent in the science that is talking about sustainability and biodiversity conservation. On the session 2, there was a roundtable on biodiversity monitoring and data, and the success of the GBF fundamentally relies on fit for purpose indicators with sufficient and credible data. Core data available to policy makers must be tailored to underpin indicators, research, and decision processes at all scales. Repeatable workflows and methodologies for monitoring essential biodiversity variables can be applied at level national, scale up for global aggregation. Filling spatial, temporal, and taxonomic data gaps is essential to guide conservation and sustainable use. A culture of data sharing, capacity building, and resource mobilizations are still needed to generate the information to implement and track the GBF, and new opportunities to scale up data mobilization include engaging the private sector also and development actors to share biodiversity data from environmental impact assessment, for instance, and integrating data from DNA-based biodiversity sampling. There was a survey and it was clear that there is a significant barrier for data and information for monitoring, and that Target 19 should include the development of biodiversity monitoring systems. On session 3, there were two subsessions: harnessing science, technology, and innovations to support the implementation of the post-2020 framework. On biodiversity, climate, and livelihoods, and the implication for the framework, the coming decade is crucial. So post-2020 framework needs to aim for a net gain in the status of biodiversity. Environmental policy has too long focused on pressures and not on drivers, and we need to focus on drivers for restoration of nature, for society to adapt. And we need to focus also on rural areas, indigenous peoples, and local communities, and to redesign the mechanisms to enable inclusiveness. Inclusiveness has been a very repetitive echo in every session. Nature's benefits and risks are inequitably distributed, and we do need to build inequity into our value system and when we design instruments for desired outputs, outcomes, and impact. We also need to extend beyond economic efficiency and incorporate inclusive wealth indicators, which embraces a full range of natural capital, among others. This will help internalize the externalities in decision-making and find the solutions to correct policy failures. The human nature interdependency require nexus approaches emphasizing livelihood improvement, empowering women, integrating traditional and scientific knowledge. The coming decade needs also to increase financial flows to enhance the capacity development of developing countries and develop an eco-technology transparently with freely giving prior and informing community guidance can be probably fostered by the UN hosting a platform on this topic. On the other session on current landscape of renewable energy technologies and applications, renewable energy can create context-specific trade-offs, considering that these renewable energy installations, ancillary infrastructure, and upstream, downstream activities could affect biodiversity through multiple mechanisms. It is important to delineate and conceptualize the trade-offs between biodiversity and renewable energy. We need large-scale modeling exercises and comprehensive environmental impact assessment. We also need to reduce and eliminate misalignment between policies on renewable energy expansion and biodiversity conservation. There is the digital technology that can facilitate several mechanisms such as information sharing, transparency, interconnectivity, value maximization, etc. Meeting biodiversity and energy transition targets requires combining attention to energy infrastructure transitions, to changing land use, and to situated social identities. On the fourth session, on the links between biodiversity loss, climate change, and zoonotic diseases, there was a call on reducing biodiversity loss and zoonotic diseases by considering the impact and adaptation of climate change. Protected areas can stop the spread of zoonotic diseases. There has been some presentations on this topic, and forest restoration can decrease the transmission risk of zoonotic diseases. However, depending on the way landscape configuration it is done, it can increase the risk of some other diseases, so it has to be well configured. Investments in nature, including halting land use changes, supporting restoration, and making food systems nature positive are key to preventing the next pandemic. Mainstreaming biodiversity, climate change, and health requires being inclusive, integrative in policymaking, and work on education based on good science. Using nature-based solutions and ecosystem approaches when implementing mainstreaming will be key. On the final two sessions on young scholars and professional sessions, there was this session on ecological restoration, which has a great potential to address a wide set of biodiversity and climate challenges, and young scholars and professionals play an important role in the global South particularly. Presently, there are calls for massive investment in nature's capacity to capture and store carbon. We must be aware that, and we need to ensure that restoration doesn't just emphasize carbon, but that there are clear targets with prioritizing ecosystem integrity and functions. with appropriate safeguard for biodiversity, human rights, and rights of indigenous people and local communities. Nature is deeply intertwined with and influenced by social, economical, and political forces. Therefore, understandings of dynamic people-nature relationships are crucial to inform restoration activities that can support positive ecological outcomes alongside social well-being. Urban areas often have the incentives, the resources, and the knowledge enabling local governments to take the lead in developing new methods and technology for successful restoration in challenging severely degraded sites, as well as developing inclusive methods for participatory restoration, incorporating social and cultural dimensions in restoration activities. Then the last session on this SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals Labs on Biodiversity Solutions for Change, the viable biodiversity-based solutions for sustainability already exist, and new solutions still can be developed based on new technologies and local contexts. Local context is also very important for the whole implementation. So there were solutions proposed by members of the team of this lab on novel cropping system for biodiversity, sustainable use and food security in Armenia, with biodiversity digitization, including into policy-making processes, biodiversity-driven co-design ecotourism to support sustainability in Madagascar, conservation of biodiversity and native plant species through traditional agroforestry system for livelihood, water protection, and sustainable life in Thailand, biodiversity for homestead, windbreak and gardens for the environmental and sociocultural sustainability in Japan, in Okinawa, developing management by considering internal migration with drought to be considered, using biodiversity will support livelihood and stop further habitat loss in Uganda, and the biodiversity of tea species in the garden produce socioeconomic and ecological benefits in China. As a whole conclusion for this session, there are multiple synergies between SDGs triggered by biodiversity use and conservation at local level that have potentiality to be scaled up to regional and national level, though we need to still find out ways for successfully scaling up. Thank you very much.
Okay, a big thank you to Dr. Rodriguez for presenting the preliminary conclusions and recommendations of the different sections. So just to mention here that the report will be refined by tax team and including the session's co-lead. And once this is finalized, will be submitted to the upcoming 24th meeting of the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice, which starts on May 3rd, and also to the third meeting of the open-ended working group to contribute to the preparation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So thank you again. So yes, now the curtain is closing on our wonderful event. And I would like to invite you now to the closing remarks by representatives of the co-organizing institutions. So first on my list is Dr. Scott Miller, who is the co-chair of the CSP. Dr. Miller doubles as the chief scientist in the office of the Undersecretary for Science and Research at the Smithsonian Institution and as the interim director of Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. But before joining the Smithsonian Institution, he held leadership positions at the National Zoological Park, the National Museum of Natural History, the International Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology in Nairobi, Kenya, and the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, Hawaii. So Dr. Miller, you may have the floor.
Thank you. These virtual sessions have shown the importance of science in underpinning the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. As we continue to develop that framework, we need to strengthen aligned actions for protecting and restoring life on Earth. It is critical to continue solidifying the science policy interface and to advance science-based solutions across sectors, including infrastructure, energy, health, and agriculture. We also need to build new economic and financial systems that account for the essential benefits that society derives from nature. Scientific institutions should be key partners in this process, as should other stakeholders, in particular indigenous communities. While the current global trajectory is concerning, we do still have an opportunity to make this decade count. It was inspiring to hear from young scholars this morning about their work on nature-based solutions. We also have heard about the importance of sharing data to understand and to monitor biodiversity, especially given that most species do not recognize national boundaries. We also need to address declining capacity in taxonomy and systematics, and international initiatives such as the Global Taxonomy Initiative, International Barcode of Life or Bioscan, Global Genome Biodiversity Network, and the Earth Biogenome Project will all help to ensure our ability to actually identify the species that compose biodiversity. I would like to thank all of the speakers and co-organizers of these insightful sessions and look forward to continuing our discussions and working with members of the CSP and like-minded institutions around the world to ensure that policymakers incorporate scientific input into national strategies and to advance research and share knowledge across the sciences, arts, and humanities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Miller. So next on my list is Dr. Oscar Gauldron, the CSP co-chair and deputy director of the Humboldt Institute. Dr. Gauldron is a system engineer and physicist. Prior to joining the Humboldt Institute, he worked as professor and vice rector of research at the Industrial University of Santander in Colombia. He was also the technical director for promotion of research and the deputy director at Cosciencias in Colombia. So Dr. Gauldron, you now have the floor.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, I have no doubt that these 2 weeks have been absolutely productive and relevant, and we are charting the way forward in order to bring innovative-based science and solutions to decision makers. As the scientific community, we will contribute significantly with strong scientific and technical inputs and recommendations to the upcoming processes for the adoption and implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This session has shown us that the reflection on the relationship between people and nature every day is more important. We all know that biodiversity of people is interconnected and human beings will be harmed if biodiversity is damaged. From the Humboldt Institute, we are continually seeking adaptive and innovative ways to collaborate to achieve the global biodiversity agenda. It is crucial to join forces under the scientific community and work in a coordinated way to help decision makers to understand the dimensions of challenges we face, take the adequate measures, and ensure conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystem services. For us, it is also important that scientific findings be communicated simply to reach more diverse audiences and have a better informed, more proactive and responsible society. Measures are needed to improve the mobilization and sharing of data and knowledge required to support the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We need to promote the establishment of biodiversity monitoring systems and protocols, ensure that data is shared in standardized forms to enable reuse and universal access, and to identify indicators and tools to ensure that data, information, and knowledge are made available in formats that can support policy and decision-making, planning, and implementation relating to biodiversity. The development of scenarios and models has also an influential role in this process. Technology and innovation could be better harnessed to support the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, especially at the regional, national, and local levels. And now, we know that it is our responsibility to innovate the way we produce and share scientific knowledge if we want to support decision makers at different levels and sectors. To reverse these processes, in addition to specific planning, development policy, and environment tools, comprehensive transformative changes in the global approach are needed for human beings to generate conscious processes to reduce the accelerated trend of drivers of biodiversity loss. From the humble institute as an institution that has to generate knowledge useful for decision makers and as a part of the scientific global community, we want to offer our technical support and capacities at different scales in order to contribute to the effective implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. The CSP is also a network of high-level scientific institutions willing to support the parties of the CBD and the global biodiversity community whenever it is needed. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Gauldron, for the excellent speech. So now I would like to invite Professor Shashidhara for his closing remark. Professor Shashidhara is the president of IUBS, is the acting dean of research and professor of biology at Ashoka University of India. And prior to joining the Ashoka University, he worked at the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology in Hyderabad and the India Institute of Science, Education and Research in Pune. So Professor Shashidhara, you may now have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Not only for me to speak here and particularly for helping IUBS be a partner to the Science Forum right from the day one of the Science Forum. And IUBS is honored and privileged to be the co-organizer of the 5th meeting. And as you could see, the post-2020 biodiversity framework, what we were thinking in 2019 or 2018, that whole thinking has changed or has to change substantially because of the pandemic that we're experiencing. Much of the biodiversity discussions are on biodiversity, understanding the science of the biodiversity, how to conserve and how to make it sustainable in the context of its ecosystem function and services, right? But in the context of the pandemic, we also need to worry about how to make sure that we sustain the biodiversity to an extent that the future pandemics are prevented. A session on the zoonotic diseases that was organized as part of this 5th meeting of the Science Forum clearly elaborated that biodiversity shrinking is not only will affect the ecosystem and functions, which will have an implication on agriculture and other, the human benefits. Beyond that, it's also going to be extremely dangerous because of the experience of the current pandemic. It's going to have a global impact. And as you all know, the science of biodiversity started almost 500 years ago, although there is a lot of traditional knowledge across the globe and understanding the biodiversity and its ecosystem and functions. But much of the modern science of biodiversity started with a natural historian in France, Buffon. And from then onwards to Darwin, we actually made much progress, and the Darwin's theory of evolution provided a better scientific framework for understanding the biodiversity. And in the last 100 years also, with the beginning of the molecular biology, chemical ecology, and so forth, we have even a better understanding of the interlinkages between very different forms of life and its surrounding environment. And this science has to be used to better understand the biodiversity for its conservation. And as previous speaker mentioned, it has to be a global effort. The reason it's global effort, as we all know, in the last 150 years of science of biodiversity, is even if a related species in a different geoclimatic conditions, it will have a different, the phenotypic manifestation. And the biodiversity is all about how the organisms have a diverse, life history traits in different, geoclimatic conditions. And for this means, the conservation of biodiversity has to be a global effort. How good the science is, it will not be that useful unless the local conditions and the local, the factors which influence the biodiversity are not studied well. So in that context, it's very important that the whole world has to participate in this. For that, we need to take this kind of a scientific discussions across the globe and develop some educational material for the school and the higher education students, for teachers, and for the scientists at large. And I hope that the subsequent meetings on the policy related to biodiversity will ensure that there is a global involvement for the biodiversity, maintenance and lesser exploitation, so that the future pandemics are also prevented. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Shashidhara, for the wonderful speech. So next, I'd like to invite Mr. Chunhong Li, the Vice President and Secretary General of the Chinese Society for Environmental Sciences. So prior to joining the Chinese Society for Environmental Sciences, Mr. Li worked in the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of China and in the Environment Bureau of Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So, Mr. Li, you now have the floor.
女士们、先生们、朋友们，大家好！很荣幸代表本届科学论坛的中方承办单位中国环境科学学会参加今天的闭幕式。
Ladies and gentlemen and friends, it is an honor for me to participate in today's closing ceremony representing the Chinese Society of Environmental Sciences, CSES, which is the organizer of the Science Forum from China.
首先，请允许我介绍一下中国环境科学学会。中国环境科学学会是中国成立最早、规模最大、专门从事环境保护事业的科技社团，拥有中国最顶级的生态环境科学团队，是链接政府、学术和产业等社会各界的桥梁纽带。一直以来，从科技层面为生态环境部的决策和行政提供了许多支撑。
First of all, please allow me to introduce CSES. CSES is the earliest and largest scientific and technological society established in China that specializes in environmental protection. Having the top ecological and environmental science team in China, CSES is a bridge linking the government, academia, industry, and other social sectors. It has been supporting the decision-making and administration of the Ministry of Ecology and Environment from the scientific and technological perspective.
我们愿意与今天在线参会的全球各类机构加强交流与合作，促进生物多样性保护领域的科技成果转化和传播，为实现2030年可持续发展议程和2035年人与自然和谐共生美好愿景做出积极贡献。
We are willing to strengthen exchanges and cooperation with various institutions around the world participating online today to promote the transformation and dissemination of scientific and technological achievements in the field of biodiversity conservation in order to realize the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and make contribution to the Vision 2050 of living in harmony with nature.
在新冠疫情依然严峻的形势下，科学论坛各主办单位和承办单位克服困难，提前开展线上研讨。经过5场高效的研讨，产出了一系列丰富的成果。中国环境科学学会也将加大这次线上会议成果在中国的传播，为10月份召开的 COP15 营造良好氛围。
Despite the great COVID-19 situation worldwide, the organizers and co-organizers of the Joint Food Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science have overcome the difficulties and carried out online sessions in advance. After 5 productive sessions, a series of rich results have been produced. CSES will also promote the dissemination of the results of this virtual segment in China to create a good atmosphere for COP15 to be held in October.
在此，我非常感谢生物多样性公约秘书处、联合国环境规划署国际生态系统管理伙伴计划、全球环境战略研究所、国际生物科学联合会等单位付出的努力。
Here, I am very grateful to the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the United Nations Environment Programme International Ecosystem Management Partnership, the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, and the International Union of Biological Sciences and other organizers and co-organizers for their efforts in convening the Science Forum.
期待在今年的10月份，我们再相聚，开展科学论坛更多议题的研讨。谢谢大家。
I look forward to meeting you again this October. We'll have discussions on more topics then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Li, for the wonderful contribution. So now we will go on to Professor Kensuke Fukushi for his closing remark. So Professor Fukushi is the Vice Director of the Institute for Future Initiatives at the University of Tokyo. He is an academic program officer at the United Nations University Institute for the Advanced Study of Sustainability. He also holds appointments at the University of Tokyo Graduate School of Engineering and Frontier Sciences, where he organizes the Urban Sustainability Science Laboratory. So Professor Fukushi, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank local organizer for making this online conference happen. I'm extremely happy that Science Forum for Biodiversity and International Conference on Sustainability Science, 2 meetings jointly organized, and we found that we maximize the synergy. I'd like to congratulate great success. I have visited most of the session. They are very active and full of new ideas. We are expecting a lot of serious problems in the future that we must tackle and solve. Ecosystem services supported by rich and proper biodiversity could be one of the solutions for various issues, including climate change, epidemiological issue, and rural sustainable development. We have found a lot of hints to tackle these problems throughout this meeting. I was extremely impressed with co-design approach with stakeholders, which we believe right way to proceed academic research in this field. This is a part of 8th International Conference of Sustainability Science, and we are planning to have second part of ICSS with COP15 this fall. We look forward to seeing you again during next meeting. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Fukushi. So last on my list is Ms. Jyoti Filipp, the Director of the Implementation Support Division at the CBD Secretariat. So prior to joining the CBD Secretariat, Ms. Filipp worked as a Senior Advisor to UNDP in area of resource-based payments for REDD+ within the context of the Green Climate Fund, both from Jakarta and Geneva. So Ms. Filipp, you may now have the floor.
Thank you so much for inviting me here today. Dear participants, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be here to close the virtual segment of the joint 5th Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science. I would like to start by expressing my gratitude to all the co-organizers, the contributing partners, the presenters and the participants to this very, very important event. Thank you in particular to the Consortium of Scientific Partners the International Union of Biological Sciences, the University of Tokyo, and of course, the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of the People's Republic of China for the incoming COP15 presidency. In the course of the past 2 weeks, we have heard invaluable research findings, insights, and ideas that will help us address and reverse the decline of biodiversity worldwide and better harness science, technology, and innovation to help countries push for the transformative change that is needed to halt biodiversity loss and put us on a path of regeneration. Dear participants, as you know, we are currently immersed in the preparation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This process includes the formal sessions of the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice, SubSTA, and the subsidiary body on implementation, SBI, which will start in less than 2 weeks. Science-based and evidence-driven policy making and implementation are of paramount importance. Therefore, the conclusions and recommendations of these virtual sessions will be valuable and timely contributions to this process. Ladies and gentlemen, as Sir Robert Watson highlighted during the opening of these virtual sessions, the unequal and resource-intensive development models degrades and surpasses Earth's finite capacity to sustain human well-being. We must restore and adapt the Earth's capacity. The coming decade is crucial and the challenge is systemic. And we heard a lot of similar sentiments yesterday at the US Climate Summit, exactly the same sentiments we heard yesterday. To address such challenges, setting ambitious targets as part of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will be crucial, and even more so, enabling and promoting ambitious actions on the ground. We count on you, the scientific and policy communities, and on citizen science to mobilize and sustain the critical mass of knowledge and awareness necessary to realize the radical transformation we need to change the current paradigm. And let me add my deep thanks to the science community for their commitment to implementing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework once it is adopted. We look forward to the further contributions of the Joint Science Policy Forum for Biodiversity and International Conference on Sustainability Science that will take place prior to COP15. Thank you very much for your commitment.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Mathur, Filipp. And on this note, I would now like to hand back to my co-chair, Erie, to guide us through the remaining part of the closing section. Thank you.
Thank you, Ismemen, and all the those who have given the closing remarks. Dear participants, colleagues, we have now come to the end of the virtual segment of the Science and Science Forum for Biodiversity and the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science. I would like to thank once again all the co-organizers of this virtual segment, and I'll take this opportunity to mention them again. You've heard of them over and over, but I'll still mention them. We had the International Union of Biological Sciences, IUBS, the Consortium of Scientific Partners on Biodiversity, the University of Tokyo Institute for Future Initiatives, the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of the People's Republic of China, the Chinese Society for Environmental Sciences, the United Nations Environment Program, the UNEP CMC, WCMC, that's the World Conservation Monitoring Center, the UNEP International Ecosystem Management Partnership, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, GBIF, the International Science Council, the Institute for Global Environment Strategies, IGS, the Stockholm Resilience Center, University of Stockholm, and the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. We also want to thank the partner organizations that contributed to these virtual sessions, and these include the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IBES, the Group on Earth Observations and Biodiversity Observation Network, GeoBon, the German Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research, the UN Institute for Advanced Studies of Sustainability, UNU, the West African Biodiversity and Ecological Services at the University of Bonn, Nature Serve, VATNet, and last but not least, the Young Ecosystem Service Specialists. I would like to thank you all. It's been wonderful to work with all of you in organizing these virtual sessions. In a special way, allow me to thank once again the Ministry of Ecology and Environment of the People's Republic of China, who are our next host. They've been very supportive throughout the process. And also like to thank the University of Tokyo and IUBS for the financial contributions that made the organization of these virtual sessions possible. I would also like to thank all the keynote speakers, the presenters, the discussants, and the moderators for making this possible through sharing your views, knowledge, ideas, and diverse perspectives over the last 2 weeks. Allow me also to thank in a special way the global coordinators of these virtual segments, my colleague Claudio Chiaroyo, Program Management Officer at the CVD Secretariat, and Dr. Natalie Formapra, who is the Executive Director of IUBS, as well as my colleagues at the Secretariat, Jesse Monnier, Claire Parois, and others who worked so hard behind the scenes to make these events a success. I'd also like to thank Pavi, Arok, and Clarion of Mixog, and the entire team for setting up and maintaining the technology that enabled us to have our deliberations seamlessly. We've not had any problems throughout all the sessions. So thank you so much. And last but not least, I would like to thank you all the participants who have taken part in these events over the last 2 weeks. We had an average of 260 participants from all parts of the world attending each session via Zoom, and over 500 participants who were watching via YouTube, which is quite an impressive level of participation. Well, it's been a great pleasure to have you all actively engaged in these sessions. Your combined ideas and perspectives have made this virtual segment a memorable success, and we look forward to our continued engagement as we prepare for the second part. Hopefully it will be face-to-face, but if not, it will be virtual, which will be organized in the lead to COP15. And as announced earlier in the chat, the Q&A discussions for today's sessions will continue online and will be open over the next 3 days. So please go in and chat, and the questions that have not been answered will be answered then also as well. It's been a great honor for me and my co-chair, Isa Memen, to preside over this closing session. So I would now like to declare that this virtual segment of the 5th Science Forum and the 8th International Conference on Sustainability Science are now officially closed. Thank you very much.